Welcome to A Finer Future for Southern Oregon. I'm Paul Sheldon, the president of Emerging Futures Network. And with me facilitating today is Hogan Sharrow, our coordinator, and Chris Byrne, he'll be in the background. His video says Emerging Futures, and Julie Caldwell, our founder. We're going to be graced as conversation starters today with three amazing resource people, Hunter Lovins, Adam Danforth, and Gabriela Satay. Hunter Lovins is the founder and president of Natural Capitalism Solutions in Colorado. She's the author of this wonderful book, A Finer Future, which is my nomination for the best book of 2020. Gabriela Satay is a student at Oregon State University, working on a double bachelor's degree in political science and sustainability with a minor in marketing. She's a passionate but grounded person about regenerative economies and social justice. She's been working as an intern with SOCAN, Southern Oregon Climate Action Network, where she created the Businesses Taking Action survey as a tool to measure social and environmental impacts of local businesses in Southern Oregon. She wants to help shape a world where economics work for nature, not against it. We're also joined by Adam Danforth, who's a collaborating director at Rogue Food Unites, the Southern Oregon-based nonprofit coordinating local food businesses to meet the feeding needs of wildfire evacuees. For those of you who are not from Southern Oregon, we lost over 2,000 housing units and several hundred businesses to fires last September. And Adam is also a James Beard Award-winning butcher and author, the American ambassador for the Butcher's Manifesto, and a board member of the Chefs Collaborative and Good Meat Project. And Adam lives in Ashland, Oregon, with the rest of us except for Hunter. Speaking of Hunter, full disclosure, Hunter Lovins is my older sister. I've been collaborating with her on various disruptive activities for, going on 70 years now. And I thought I'd just tell a little story that I don't get to tell very often, because this is somewhat of a friendly group. Just to give you an idea of who Hunter really is as a person, when I was 12 and Hunter was 13, we went to summer camp up in the mountains above Los Angeles. And one of the programs that Hunter was involved in up there was horseback riding. So we loved to go out horseback riding at dawn. And one morning up in the mountains, we were riding through the chaparral at the edge of the forest, slowly walking along. And Hunter saw on the trail ahead of us a very large rattlesnake spread out on the trail, sunning itself in the morning sun. She always, back in those days, carried a buck knife, you know, like a Bowie knife sized buck knife. And without even batting an eyelash, she slowed her horse to a walk. She knew her horse hadn't seen the snake yet and hadn't spooked yet. So she pulled out her knife, threw it from the back of her horse, pinning the snake to the ground, jumped off, killed it with a rock, cut its head off, took it back to camp, skinned it, and wore the skin of that snake as her hat band for many years. I don't imagine it's still on your hat, is it, Hunter?
No, it wore off a long time ago.
But that was really a hallmark for me throughout my childhood and early adulthood of don't mess with Hunter Lovins. So with that as an introduction, I'd like to ask Hunter to spend maybe the next 20 or 25 minutes talking about regenerative economies and the whole notion of a finer future, creating an economy in service to life. And then after Hunter's done, we'll have a little discussion period. Then I'll introduce Gabriela again to talk about her activities with the Southern Oregon Climate Action Network. And we'll finish up with Adam Danforth, getting to the real meat of the matter. So Hunter, if Hogan can make you a host, I think you can share your screen.
Right, I think I can do that. So let's give her a go. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
So far, so good.
Perfect. It's an honor to be with you. I'm going to talk tonight about a finer future, particularly in the context of regenerative agriculture and feeding ourselves. We think we're here because of this big brain of ours, but we're not. We're here because of 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. And yet the way in which we are going about feeding ourselves these days is destroying that soil and will, if left unchecked, destroy us. You all know that we are in a state of emergency. We are in a climate crisis. You experienced this directly. Paul, you will recognize the picture at the bottom. That was your restaurant.
That was Tauntaun's Cafe with our pizza parlor in the background.
Yeah. We also know how to solve the climate crisis and do so at a profit. I spoke about a month ago to the Oregon Solar Association and laid out how to do this in the context of renewable energy. And I'll talk tonight about how to do it in the context of regenerative agriculture. You solve half the problem by going to renewable energy, and this is now cheaper everywhere in the world than fossil fuel. You solve the other half by taking the excess carbon that is now in the air out of the air and putting it into the soil. And the global climate scientists recognize that in order to solve this climate crisis, this is what we have to do. If we simply increase soil carbon 2%, that offsets all our human emissions. If we increase soil carbon a bit more, we start taking out the excess carbon. Regenerative agriculture is an approach that was first put forth by Bob Rodale. He was concerned about the way that the term organic was being bandied about and said what we really need is an agriculture that in all respects enhances everything that it touches so that it encourages innovation on farms, in our communities, social, economic, and spiritual well-being as its goal. Vandana Shiva, the great activist in India working against biopiracy, says that it's the solution to the soil crisis, food crisis, health crisis, climate crisis, and the crisis of democracy. What we're basically talking about is managing land in ways that do not strip it of its nutrients, of its resources, and particularly its carbon. The way in which we're managing land now is decarbonizing the soil, denitrifying the soil. Oxides of nitrogen are also a greenhouse gas. Here's what we're talking about. If you're looking at row crops, this is Marty from the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, holding up a piece of Kernza wheat, showing the depth of the root of this perennial crop. This is different than the annual wheat right next to it. That has little short stubby roots. And every year you have to plow the soil, plant it again, decarbonizing it. The Kernza wheat, being perennial, does not have to be replanted. You don't have to break the soil. It comes up all on its own. And those deep roots take carbon and take it deep into the ground. In this case, about 10 feet worth. So Patagonia has teamed up with the Land Institute, making what they call long root ale. Good beer. The other half of this approach is the use of grazing animals. Alan Savory, who pioneered this, says that we cannot solve the climate crisis or the crisis of desertification without animals on the land managed in the way that the world's grasslands and grazing animals co-evolved. The world's grasslands are the second largest carbon sink after the oceans. They actually hold more carbon than there is now in the atmosphere. The soils got that carbon by dense herds of grazing animals, dense packed because there were predators. If you're about to get eaten, the safe place to be is in the middle of the herd. They eat everything in front of them. They trample everything under them. They fertilize everything behind them. They move on and they don't come back until the grass has regrown. We can do the same thing now with electric fencing, with opening and closing water holes. But without that animal impact, we're not going to solve the climate crisis. Now, the vegivores of the world say that you just have to get rid of animals, that we'll all eat vegetables. I had a piece in The Guardian arguing with George Monbiot where he said this, and I know that this approach works because I've done it. We managed about 1,000 acres of ground in the Roaring Fork Valley where they'd taken the cattle off, and for 20 years it had just sat there. And so it was overrun with noxious weeds. The grass had fallen over and thatched in. What did we do? Cows. It's not the cow, it's the how. And again, dense packed, and you can see the results. This is after only about 2 years of changing how we managed the land. South Africa, the land on the left is holistically managed. The land on the right is conventionally managed. And this is now being done the world around. Savory Institute has hubs, people who are teaching other people, other farmers, ranchers, how to do this. Millions of hectares of ground now under this management. It makes it more profitable. This is Will Harris of White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia. He took over a conventional cattle ranch that had been in his family, committed to this approach of holistic management. On his 3,200 acres, he employs 149 people. His neighbor, commodity peanut farmer on essentially the same acreage, hires 4. As a result, the community of Bluffton, Georgia is coming back to life. He has decommodified the process, raising animals in humane ways and building up the local economy. Meet Gabe Brown. Gabe's a North Dakota corn soybean farmer who was going broke. And because he was going broke, he said, I'll try anything. The first thing he did was to stop breaking the soil. He stopped plowing. He went to no-till because it cut his cost. But how did he get nutrients into his land? So he planted cover crops. Again, these deep-rooted crops. Then he turned the cattle out to eat the cover crops so that he could drill seed his corn and soybeans. Gabe has gone from being essentially broke to now not being able to keep up with demand, selling his produce at considerably more than it costs him to grow it. He says, I'd rather sign the back of the check than the front of the check. And he has gone from land with a little under 2% soil organic matter to now over 11%, in some of his plots as high as 15%. Every 1% soil organic matter is 5 to 10 tons of carbon per acre. And Gabe says carbon is the key to profitability. It's the key to the health of the soil. Because of these guys, mycorrhizal fungi, this is the life in the soil, among many other species of life in soil. Mycorrhizal fungi is what mineralizes the carbon that comes out of the air through photosynthesis, is sloughed off by the roots of plants as sugars, and then stored into the soil. How do you increase the mycorrhizal fungi? Get rid of the chemicals, get rid of the tillage, and maintain living plant on the ground as long as possible. The result is you go from soil that, well, dirt essentially, to dark brown, black soil. When the pioneers first came across the plains of the US, they found 10 feet of thick black soil. That black is carbon. And here are Gabe's numbers, a little under 2% to over 11% soil organic matter. Animals are a key part of a healthy ecosystem. You're doing it in Oregon. Corey Carmen on Carmen Ranch, working with Eco Trust, selling to Burgerville, working with neighboring ranchers. Again, constantly moving the cattle. that fertilizes the ground. It puts the nutrients into the ground. It enables the ground to hold water. So in an increasingly hot, dry world, this is going to be incredibly important. Mimi Castillo's doing the same thing, growing wine. You have organizations across Oregon that are transforming your food system. The Red on Salmon Street is a project to enable smallholder farmers, ranchers to have a distribution place, local cooks, local fisher folk, working with Beeline to distribute the products around the Portland area. Again, there is a wealth of organizations across the state that are engaged with this transformation of how we feed ourselves. And never forget, eating is an agricultural act, as my friend Wendell Berry says. Interestingly, the big companies are starting to get into this. Unilever was one of the first, then Danone. More recently, General Mills has committed to regenerative agriculture on 1 million acres. This is the General Mills principle of regenerative agriculture. And it's very much the same as what I was describing with Gabe Brown, because General Mills hired Gabe to teach them how to do this. More recently, Microsoft has said they are not only going to go carbon neutral, so offsetting as much carbon as they emit on an ongoing basis, they're going carbon negative. They're going to take out of the atmosphere as much carbon as the company ever historically emitted. And they're going to put $1 billion into doing this using regenerative agriculture and nature-based solutions. So then Bezos turns around and says, well, we'll put 10 billion in. Now, he has no earthly idea how to do it, but I spoke recently with his new head of, wait for it, sustainable shopping. And we talked about regenerative agriculture. This summer, the Nature Conservancy with Cargill, McDonald's, Target, they're going to get into regenerative agriculture. And Walmart said, we are going to be a regenerative company. Now, they have no idea what they're talking about. I know this for a fact through conversations with their CEO, Doug McMillan, but they're also very curious to talk to people who do know what they're talking about and begin this transformation. Now, this is one of the reasons that it's important that you do this at the local level. These big companies are not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it because there's a business case. And you can do it too. You can begin to convert your lawns to food growing. Solar can coexist with agriculture. It's called agrovoltaics. Take 1% of the agricultural land and put it into agrovoltaics. It would supply the world's need for electricity. The age of fossil is over. Our choice now is, what kind of a future do we want to create for ourselves? We know how to solve the climate crisis at a profit. What we need to figure out now is how to live together in community and how to build this finer future. And maybe that's enough to kick off a conversation.
That's wonderful, Hunter. Thank you so much. And as many of you know, Emerging Futures Network is dedicated to engaging and educating community members to implement regenerative principles and practices at the local level in Southern Oregon, and encouraging people to implement replicable solution-oriented projects. This is one of them, our community meeting here, and we'll be talking more about that later on. Before we unmute your microphones to allow a little discussion about what Hunter's been sharing with us, I also want to add that This is the first of two sessions today. At 7 o'clock this evening, SOCAN is having a spotlight on local food, and I put the information in the chat. For those of you who aren't registered, please do click on the link there to get registered for the session from 7 to 8 tonight with Lenita Witt and Suzanne Willow of Willow Witt Ranch and Allison Hensley, Sex Hour of Rogue Valley Food System Network, and Elise Higley from Our Family Farms. So that it'll be a full day today for those of you who can stick it out. And Hogan, can people unmute their own microphone, or do we have to ask them to raise their hands?
Chris is actually DJing, Paul. So Chris is.
Yes, people can unmute their own microphones.
Okay, so if you'd like to comment or ask a question, please unmute and have at it. We've got about 5 minutes here to have a little open discussion, or even 10 minutes if we need it.
Adam.
Hi, Hunter. So I the work I do with the Good Meat Project and Chefs Collaborative also obviously is a lot rooted in regenerative agriculture. It was nice to see a lot of your friends mentioned in that presentation. How from your perspective right now, are you seeing the regenerative movement grappling with the aspect of so much of the knowledge that is being presented is ancestral knowledge, and the aspect of indigenous rights and equality within the work that's being done, not only just land back policies that need to be there, but also just that so much of the money going into invested regenerative policy is going to people who are in institutions and not representing the origins of what so many of these practices are.
That's an excellent point. I'm beaming into you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Arapaho and the Cheyenne. We are all immigrants. We are all on someone else's land. And a good first step is just to acknowledge that, to learn whose land it is you're on, and then to begin to work with BIPOC communities on what is it they need, as opposed to us coming in and saying, here's what you should do. I mean, we can say that to ourselves, but to engage with them and listen. And when I do that, what I hear about is desire for food sovereignty, specific asks for help on things like water rights, or ensuring that they have access to markets. And I say this because I'm engaged now here in Colorado with a project called the Colorado Regenerative Recovery Coalition. If we're going to build the economy back, let's do it right. And half of that right is engaging with the communities that have historically been marginalized, who have not been listened to. And again, if you're trying to listen to a community, good thing to do is to listen.
Yeah, and to just add to that a little bit, we're not all immigrants though, because there were people first here, and those first people are the ones that are often were employing a lot of these techniques and understanding of herding and emulating nature in order to create original sustainability. I do think that part of what the regenerative agriculture movement is grappling with, and people like Corey Carmen also are having to recognize, is how do you create that recognition and divert some of your money that's coming in into practices that help elevate those communities, and listening is part of it, but investment into them is also a lot of it.
True story.
I have a question. I'm curious how alfalfa fits into the regenerative ag possibilities with raising cattle, and what type of resources you might suggest for very conservative alfalfa farmers to consider looking at some of these different possibilities that you raised in your presentation.
You're talking about alfalfa, the crop, not the store.
Yeah, the hay, like most of our cattle ranchers in this area grow alfalfa, and they're very connected to growing alfalfa, but I think they grow it in the name of the cow. Like, I'm just curious how alfalfa fits in to the regenerative agriculture equation, and how you address conservative alfalfa farmers to show them the the economic potential of regenerative practices.
Farmers are what has been called dynamically conservative, particularly the older generation. That is, they work really hard at staying in the same place. They know what works because it always has worked until it doesn't work. And so when I spend a lot of time with older farmers, and I spend a lot of time with them, I ask them, what are your challenges? What's working for you? What's not working for you? And eventually you start to hear that their margins are very thin. And so I show them videos of Gabe talking about how he was going broke. He switched, not out of ideology, but out of survival. And if possible, I bring Gabe in to talk to folk. He has,
too, sweetie.
He's much better at talking to some of these good old boys than any of us. Alfalfa is a high protein crop, but you can get just as good protein from, for example, hairy vetch for cows. And this is what Gabe does. He has 28 different species of different season cover crops that he plants in between the rows of the corn and soybeans. And then he turns the cows out to eat it down so that he can, in the spring, put in his next round of corn and soybeans. And this means he doesn't have to put up hay. The cows feed themselves through the North Dakota winter. He cuts his cost. Farmers are pretty sensitive to what will cut their costs.
Yeah.
And I feed alfalfa to some of our performance horses. So I got nothing against alfalfa, but with cows, run the risk of alfalfa bloat.
Fascinating.
All right, we'll have more time for discussion later on. Hunter, are you going to be able to stay with us, or are you out of here? Okay, so hopefully, if you have more comments or questions for Hunter, we can get to that a little later. I'd like to expand the conversation now to include Gabriela Satay from Southern Oregon Climate Action Network. Gabriela, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
And am I pronouncing your name right?
Yeah.
Oh, good. All right, Gabriela is one of the shining stars of Southern Oregon right now, who is masquerading as an intern for Southern Oregon Climate Action Network. Please take us to someplace wonderful.
Thank you, Paul. All right. If everybody could mute their microphones, I think there's some feedback coming through from somebody. Great, thank you. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Excellent. Okay, so I'm coming on here today to talk about my internship project with Southern Oregon Climate Action Network. I created a model called Businesses Taking Action to evaluate business behavior in the Rogue Valley. And I did this because I'm very passionate about different models of sustainable and regenerative economies. And I'm very interested in learning about how businesses can not only sustain the current economy, but give back to it and make it better than it was before. So I created this survey. I based it off of a bunch of different existing models for evaluating businesses, and then I reconfigured and created my own questions to be more specific to the Rogue Valley. So the survey is an opportunity for local businesses to showcase what they're already doing. There are a lot of great business practices happening currently in the Rogue Valley, but there wasn't previously a method for evaluating. So that was the main reason that I wanted to create this survey. And it's also an opportunity for businesses to set future goals and to see what other businesses are doing and find inspiration from that. So there are a lot of questions in my survey about future goals and commitments. And I think it's really important to have these answers public to the community as a way to provide transparency and also to have another layer of accountability added to the businesses in our community. So all of the answers to the survey after they're submitted get posted to the SOCAN website so that consumers can go and view those answers and feel good about where they're spending their money. So the survey consists of 18 questions. It's a combination of multiple choice and short answers, and it's broken into two sections. One is environmental action and the other is social action. The environmental portion of the survey is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of questions concerning waste management. How are you managing your greenhouse gases, your food waste, your recycling, things like that. And there's also a focus on renewable energy. I have found through the results of this survey that a lot of local businesses are using solar and wind energy and other forms of renewable energies. And then there's also an emphasis on buying local. And I think this is a really important aspect, especially for people in the food industry, as Hunter mentioned in her presentation. There's a lot of local farmers in this area doing really great things. And so there's a lot of questions on my survey about supply chain and where you're getting your products from and how you're prioritizing local producers. And then the social portion of my survey is a little bit more broad. And I realized during my studies in sustainability that the social portion is often left out of these conversations. However, I think that it is just as important, and it also ties into environmental action very directly. So in a broad sense, you could think of social business action as the overall company culture and company mission, the purpose of the organization, and also the mindset of the employees and how those employees are being trained. So there's questions about diversity and inclusivity, whether or not you are prioritizing these trainings and practices among your employees. And there's also a question for businesses to answer whether or not they are a member of a BIPOC or LGBTQ plus community, because I really want to amplify the voices of those business leaders in our community. So that is the social portion of the survey. And I already talked about a lot of the goals, but I would just like to say again that my main goal for this survey is to increase the demand for ethical and transparent business behavior in Southern Oregon. I think that this is already happening. I hear a lot more, especially with people in my community, how consumers are really starting to pay attention to where they're spending their money and how they want to be investing in businesses that support their values. So that is one of the main goals of this project. And I also really want to, especially right now during COVID, put an emphasis on supporting local businesses, because local businesses are struggling. And so if SOCAN and me through SOCAN can find a way to help promote local business practices within the community, I think that's a really great tool moving forward. And I would also just like to mention connecting the social and environmental portions of my survey together, that I would like to talk about environmental racism and why I decided to add the social portion onto the survey. And there's a lot of proof and statistics showing that minority communities are far more affected by climate change than privileged communities. And so I think that businesses can all do their part in mitigating these effects by giving back to the local community, and especially those who are vulnerable. And if you want to get involved with this project, if you're a business, I would love to invite you to take the survey, to share it with your friends who also own businesses. I will be posting the link to the survey in the chat below. And then also, if you're a consumer, I'll be posting a link so you can view a list of participating businesses. You can see their answers. And I would also love to ask that if you find a business on the list that you didn't know about before, or maybe you didn't know their previous practices, and then you decide that you want to support that business based on the survey, I think it would be great feedback to share with the business and let them know that you heard about them through SOCAN and you're really excited about what they're doing. And I think that would be a great way to just continue building this community around conscious business behavior. So that's all for now. If you want my contact, there's my email below, and I'm open to take any questions. Let me see. Oh, stop share. Okay.
And
Yeah.
anyone can unmute themselves if you have a question or comment for Gabriela.
And I will put the links to the project in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabriela. Any questions for
Gabriela,
Gabriela now?
Hi, Gabriela, it's Adam.
Okay.
I appreciate you connecting the social environmental point because it's incredibly important. I'll talk about that a little bit more around the wildfires this year too, because it impacts that as well. Have you caught wind of the new coalition, the Southern Oregon Anti-Racist Business Coalition, that SOCAN or other organizations can become a part of that help also foster that work across industries and within Southern Oregon?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
I can point you to some of that if you're interested, and some of the work that we're doing to, especially in how, I mean, for me, how it relates to food.
Yeah, I would love that information. Thank you.
And Gabriela, you'll be with us for a while still. Yeah, was someone else coming up there? Sorry.
This is Flavia Franco. I just had a question, Gabriela. Are these local businesses that you're extending the survey to, or are you going, how large a geographic region are you going?
Yeah, so the survey is open to anybody who wants to take it, but I'm focusing specifically on local businesses. I've been marketing it to local businesses and sending it out to local businesses, but like I said, the questions are applicable to any business anywhere. So anybody's welcome to take it.
Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
You got to unmute yourself, Dave.
Is that local as in Ashland, or is that local for Rogue Valley?
Local for Rogue Valley.
Beautiful, thanks.
And Applegate too, right, Gabriela?
Yes.
As a segue to Adam Danforth, about 25 years ago, I spent over a decade in Humboldt County. I was living in Arcata. I like A-word towns, Arcata, Ashland, Aspen. And there was a rancher down there who was on the County Board of Supervisors named Roger Rodoni. And he was working on land use mediation among environmentalists, ranchers, foresters, and government people. And Roger showed up in a meeting once with a hat on that said beef, best energy efficient food. So I got one of those hats and sent it to Hunter, and she used to wear it periodically, although she typically wears her Stetson most other times as well. But Hunter alluded to the importance of animals on the land, and even people who are vegan or organic vegetarians are in large part dependent on the processed fiber that comes through animals. And so finding a place for animals in our food chain is really important. And that's why we're really excited to have Adam Danforth with us this evening. So Adam, would you like to speak a little bit and then we'll open up for broader discussion?
Sure. I really appreciate being invited to this. And it's sort of interesting because usually within the context of regenerative ag conversations, I'm talking about whole animal butchery and meat and flavor science, and which is usually what I travel around and teach. But in the context of Southern Oregon, I'm talking about Rogue Food Unites, which is a new organization that I helped to create 4 months ago in the aftermath of the Almeida fire. I mean, everybody here, I'm sure, understands some of the statistics of the Almeida fire, the 2,400 houses that were left destroyed, thousands of people who were left homeless, and many more who were left displaced. We're 4 months into that, and as of today, we still have over 550 people sheltering in hotels. We still have thousands of people who are impacted in our region, and the recovery effort is just begun, really, in a way, because as of right now, the points of potential reconstruction in many of those areas is 6 to 18 months out. So we have a long road ahead. And so to back up, right after the fire, what I saw was an immediate need of people who were going to need food. And knowing the often stereotypical way in which relief food happens is not invested into the actual local communities. And the recovery and relief aid process usually also isn't invested into the local communities. There is an upwelling of support that comes in, but it only lasts for several weeks, often at most, and then it's left. And a lot of the time, those communities end up deflating after that. And what I didn't want to happen to us was to see that same impact, especially considering the level of disaster that the Almeida fire was. On a categorical level, it's a level 7 disaster, which is actually as high as they go. The last level 7 disaster that had occurred was actually Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, if that gives you any idea of the actual human impact of the Almeida fire. We haven't had one since then. So many people don't understand just like how large of an impact that fire actually had. But also in the midst of the pandemic, we had this trauma on top of trauma intersection happening, in which we had to figure out, how do we feed people, but at the same time, how do we ensure that we're also creating a recovery effort that invests into our local economy? For me, I come from a food background, so immediately my goal was, how do I find out where the federal aid money is coming in, and how do I route that through locally owned food businesses in order to produce the food that can then support the evacuees? And there were a number of reasons why I felt like this was the best option. One, because restaurants were in their own sense of crisis at the time. Many of them were at risk of closing, and we live in a valley in which hospitality is really central to so much of how our economy survives. When you look at statistics, 7 or 8 out of 10 times when people travel, they choose it based upon the potential food that they can eat in that location. And for us, it's no different, especially because one of the core elements of what we attract people with is the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which also, as everybody knows, is not running right now. So we had all of these intersecting traumas happening. The other benefit of utilizing food businesses as a circulator of revenue through a local economy is because they circulate it higher than any other industry. 65% on average of a locally owned food business the revenue that comes to that business will stay in that local economy. And they produce jobs faster than most other industry. So by focusing on them, not only as a way to meet the human right need of food for the fire survivors, we also were going to start directing money through locally owned businesses that not only kept the money locally, but also many of these impacted communities are business owners, are employees of the hospitality business, and also employees of food growers. And within the, the migratory worker in populations, and also in the field, these are largely the people who are impacted, which is also where we had to take a step back, because when we began to embed ourselves more into the recovery efforts that were being made, we began to really learn how what's the word I'm looking for that's used so often these days, that there is an unequal amount of impact that was happening into certain communities around us. And within a few weeks, we came to realize, especially when we started to link up with the Red Cross, that across the entire state of Oregon, the entire state, for all the wildfires last year, 90% of the evacuees were already on SNAP benefits prior to losing everything in the fire. That means that all the communities that are most impacted by wildfire are the most vulnerable and often marginalized communities in our state, which then also has to lead us to the question of why are they living in the positions that end up buffering more privileged communities from the actual damage of the inevitable emergencies that occur in our state. They are actually literally physically protecting us from our own damage in a way in which they are less able to recover, and they're often also dealing already with multiple levels of trauma intersection that are occurring. And so by taking this on, actually, as one, supporting an industry, which is restaurants, already going through their own trauma. For anybody who's worked in a restaurant or works with restaurants, you know very well the like inherent instability of them as an industry. Like, I love chefs, and I love restaurants and restaurant culture, but it is a crazy industry to work in. And they live paycheck to paycheck in many ways, not only as individuals, but as a business. So when the downturn happened for COVID, so many people don't understand the lack of longevity that restaurants really truly have when it comes to their revenue. So on one side, we had this collapsing industry that is central to our survival as an economy here in the Rogue Valley, but also broadly in the country as a whole. It's the second largest employer in the country. And then on the other side, we had the victims of a natural disaster that were also victims of a systemic oppression that is occurring, that has them being food insecure, that has them being housing insecure, that has them not having insurance for certain reasons, and many of them fearful to come to aid because of the climate, social and political climate against immigrants that was happening in the last 4 years. So we had all of these concurrent situations going on. And in between those two situations, we're trying to create a reliable service for people that is a human right. And that human right, of course, is the right to be fed. And so we took this to the Red Cross initially, and they were great enough to recognize that what we were doing was, one, not original. It's not an original idea. I didn't come up with this idea, but it is innovative and hasn't been done on the level locally that we are doing it here in response to a disaster before. And then the Red Cross, for anybody who worked with the Red Cross in the recovery effort, you probably well realize actually how much of an additional disaster that was. A chaos ensued from the involvement actually of the Red Cross in our region, which was an unfortunate repercussion of their involvement. But soon, 3 weeks after their involvement, they had actually left the scene of feeding. So since just in the beginning of October, after only being a 5-week-old organization, we were invited by the state of Oregon to then take over all feeding operations in Deschutes, Douglas, Klamath, Josephine, and Jackson County. So now we cover all 5 of those counties, and we organize all the outreach and all the feeding for anybody who is fire affected in any of those counties. For me, my goal from the onset, and I've been really clear about this with everybody, is to take as much money out of the federal relief effort and get it into local hands as possible. And in order to do that, we continue to create outreach in many ways that broadens the definition of fire affected. Fire affected doesn't mean you lost your house. Fire affected could mean that you live across the street from somebody who lost their house. It could mean that you have to deal with driving through neighborhoods and having to recognize the trauma that occurred on your way to your house that still exists. It could deal with the guilt of actually not losing your house. It could deal with so many other things that are happening. And then to have to tease that out of the actual need that occurred from the pandemic at the same time is just not something we're interested in doing. So we try to continue to broaden this definition of fire affected, especially in Jackson County, which was hurt most of all in all of the state of Oregon, that pretty much anybody in the county really fire affected. How could you not be when you recognize a level 7 disaster occurring through a greenway that is supposed to connect communities and now has actually disrupted and destroyed communities? So, we feed the previously houseless, which many agencies don't consider worthy of aid. We feed people who still have homes, and we do door-to-door service throughout all of those communities. We serve over 400 meals a night door-to-door through Ashland, Talon, and Phoenix. We serve anybody who lost their home or considers themselves self-identified as food affected. And every day we're pretty much serving almost 2,500 meals a day. To this point, we have served over 235,000 meals in the last 4 months. And we've helped direct up to $4 million into locally owned businesses. We've worked with over 100 food businesses, and that not only includes restaurants, but it also includes growers, and it also includes local product makers and people who deal with all areas of that. So, for us, especially at this point in time, for many of them who are involved in us, this is maintaining the viability of their business at a time in which they would normally not be able to stay in business. So for us, when we look at sort of like what does regenerative economy really mean, at the heart of that, for me at this point, it requires equity, it requires accountability, and it requires transparency. To what I mentioned to Gabriela, that's why the Southern Oregon Anti-Racist Business Coalition is part of like what our core effort is, because in this moment when you're creating a new organization, I think that you have to first look at how are we dealing with our business practices from a regenerative standpoint that deals with humanity around us. And to that point, the anti-racism, anti-bias education as being a central pillar to the organization, how you deal with onboarding, how you deal with education and dismantling. I mean, I don't think, I think everybody these days is overwhelmed. I mean, there's so much stuff going on. And that was before we had a white supremacist terrorist takeover of our government last week. So there's just like so many things that we expect people to deal with. So, while we're a food organization, we've also really become a outreach and support organization across those counties to also be people who can direct help to mental health organizations and everywhere else. So these are, I feel like, the networks that end up arising from this that are going to help create the community that is there. Because for me, coming from actually an industry that was involved in regenerative agriculture and then moving into this industry of relief aid, and trying to support regenerative locally based businesses and agriculture through that work, I also recognize that so much of the regenerative agriculture work that's being done still continues to marginalize the people that we end up relying on to create that food. And restoring nature seems to be disingenuous when it doesn't actually restore the humanity that is on that farm and relies on that sort of disparity that exists. So for us as an organization now, that's sort of what our approach is. We provide food support for people who are food insecure, suffering from emergencies. We recognize that food insecurity is the byproduct of an oppressive system. It's not the product of a lack of food. And we try to gather aid, and at the same time as supporting people with their immediate food needs, we then make extra effort to also dismantle those systems of oppression that have created the food insecurity to begin with, and try to help create more diversity and equity and inclusion within the communities that we're serving.
Wow, you'll excuse me if I'm blown away. We have an amazing assemblage of people on this call, in addition to the folks that you've heard from so far and the folks from Emerging Futures. We have Lorraine from Pachamama Alliance, Tom and Carol Brayford from Arismendi Eco Village in St. Louis, Rod Newton from Novalis, Emil from the co-op, and on and on. A bunch of folks from the Grange. This is such an amazing assemblage. Let's take a few moments just to dialogue among each other. What do you people think of what these folks have said? And here's a chance to talk to Adam, who's really hard to reach, and Gabriela, who's really busy, and Hunter, who, you know, I colloquially say, yes, Hunter would love to walk in the room. If you have a $20,000 contribution for Natural Capitalism Solutions, I'm sure we can get her to attend. So here's a unique moment to engage these folks in dialogue. Belle, you have your hand up? You have to unmute. There you go.
Yes, you know, really, thank you, Julie and Paul and all of you who put this together. I'm just heartened. I mean, not only is it delightful to meet Hunter after hearing about you for a very long time, since Paul has been part of my life and Grange and such a great pillar in our society. But it's really the youth. It's you, Gabriela, and it's you, Adam, that so sing to my heart. And I just, you know, to know that you're out there in the fray in your own ways, you know, listening at all and putting it together in the way that it works. I just received my $600, you know, incentive card. And I just wrote to Adam, you get it. You know, this is the kind of place I want to put what is, you know, like excess for me. I mean, I don't need it, but, you know, certainly what you're up to, and Gabriela, what you're standing for. And of course, Hunter, you need to be the big space behind this all. It's just brilliant. So I say thank you. And I'm heartened by the youth. I mean, I'm heartened by what you're up to. So any way we can help.
I love that. I love that I'm being considered youth. This is like, this is my birthday was actually January 6th, which everybody may now remember as a pretty memorable date moving into the future.
Ooh,
so
you got that one nailed.
Yeah. So I appreciate that, Val, and I appreciate you recognizing that the work that we do is worth investing into.
And on that note, I want to ask all three of you, where can we best invest? I mean, you've got a lot of people in this room that are older that have retirement dollars. I, for one, am still putting my retirement money away. Where can I best invest it? And also, before I jump off, I just want to say, if you want to volunteer time, I've volunteered for Adam's project, and it's really easy. You just call his volunteer coordinator. You pick a hotel you want to wear a mask, stand outside, receive this marvelous food, put it out, let the hotel clerk know that it's there. They call the rooms. You get to see these wonderful people come, and they're so appreciative. But the biggest joy was the restaurant person who dropped it off, who said to me, just flat out, thank you for saving my job. And it's just, you know, marvelous. Anyways, Adam, I want more conversation on how Emerging Futures can work together with you, and going forward, I've got lots of ideas. So for another day. And Adam is one of our signed 7 food champions in the Emerging Futures project that we are recognizing and moving forward this year. And there'll be more coming out about that in February. But anyways, more to come.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, anybody who wants to volunteer, you can just send an email to volunteer@roguefoodunites.org, and you get routed into our volunteer system. As far as donations, frankly, right now, I would, if you were considering donating in the change that we want to see, I would donate to Southern Oregon Equity right now. Frankly, in this very moment, we don't need the donation. We will in the future, but I think there are more.
You lost your connection there for just a minute, Adam, when you said that the source of the donations or the direction.
Oh, can you hear me now?
It went mush.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I said Southern Oregon Equity, and I think that the work that they're doing is the one that is valuable to donate to. We will do fundraising in the future again for when we need to raise funds, but fortunately, right now, I think we're set with the contracts that we have with the state for the immediate funding that we need to feed for the next couple months. And so that's what I would recommend, especially in the aftermath of what happened last week. It's more apt than ever.
I would also like to say that the first organization that came to mind when Julie asked that question was So Equity. So yes, thank you for saying that before I got a chance, and I agree.
And Donnie just posted a link.
If you're looking for good businesses to support, I have a running list, which I posted in the chat, of people who have taken my survey. So that's another good way to think about how you're spending your money.
And I think, Hunter, did you have some suggestions for our retirement funds?
Sure. I helped create a company called Change Finance and their impact officer. We've created an exchange traded fund that is truly fossil fuel free. And to date, it has done very well. Now, the question with investment is, what is your goal? If your goal is to make money for yourself, then this is something that you want to look at. I'm also part of a group here in the Boulder Valley called Soil, set up by Woody Tash, Slow Opportunities for Investing Locally. It is not investment where you are going to get a financial return. Each of us who are members put in at least $300 a year, some put in more. And every month we gather, now virtually, and hear a pitch from a local farmer rancher who is seeking investment. And if we like what we hear, we make a loan to them. The loans are at zero interest. Zero interest. This is why we're not getting paid back, but it makes it much more viable for local farmers and ranchers to get access to the kind of financing they need at very, very low transaction cost to them. If you go to a bank, you're a typical farmer, they're not going to listen to you. You have no idea how to fill in the financial paperwork. In our case, we listen to your story. We evaluate who you are, may go visit your operation, and then make you a loan for $5,000 or $100,000. That tends to be the span. You also invest when you donate to a local nonprofit, when you become a member of an organization like the Grange. You're investing in the future of your community. So the first answer to your question is, what are your goals? And then there are a wide array of things. There's a brilliant book just out by my friend Michael Schumann of how to invest locally, investing in local businesses instead of a 401k. And he walks you through how to do that and argues that the actual return to you is likely to be higher than if you invested in a traditional Wall Street product. Remember also, if you are investing through a broker, you're paying that person a fee to manage your money. And so you're not going to make as much money as you may have thought you were going to.
And some great resources being put up in the chat for those of you who are monitoring it. Katie Farrell reminded us that Cultivate Oregon hosted a November symposium on sequestering carbon in the soil and creating a carbon marketplace. And there's more information at cultivateoregon.org. And then another reminder that this is the first of two sessions this evening. We'll finish within half an hour here so folks can break for dinner. But then at 7 o'clock, Southern Oregon Climate Action Now. I keep saying network because I'm Emerging Futures Network, but it's actually Southern Oregon Climate Action Now has a spotlight session on local food. And I've just posted the registration link for that in the chat. So that's a wonderful opportunity to continue on in similar themes here. So I just wanted to insert that on the way by. Adam, I wanted to ask you to say a little bit more about local multipliers, about the extent to which food businesses create the circulation of dollars within a local community, because that turns out to be one of the most important aspects of supporting local economies, is finding ways to get dollars to circulate within our community. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. One, a food business is highly reliant. A locally owned food business is highly reliant on other businesses that are around them, which is part of the main aspect of it. One, there other bakers, fisher people, potentially meat sources, as well as once they start investing into local farms. And I'm sure Hunter understands this as well, is like farms as actually also a hub of economic like sustainability in an area is huge because they rely so many on the manufacturing aspects locally in order to support their their equipment, support their grain processing, support other things when they're locally focused. There's another nonprofit called Glenwood, which is in the Hudson Valley, and they're a great nonprofit that also looks at how saving farming in the Hudson Valley actually focuses on creating these small town environments through the return of investment as well there. There's another really unbelievable organization called the International or Independent Restaurant Coalition, IRC, that arose in the aftermath of COVID, and they're one of the great pieces of research they've done as a coalition of amazing restaurants, but also in having lobbyists and a great marketing arm, is doing research in every single state as to what the current state of restaurants are and how efficient their recirculation is in those various areas, what their current unemployment is, what their risks of job loss compared to COVID are, all in an effort really to be able to raise money from relief efforts from future bills that are supporting it. I mean, sadly, none of the bills have actually provided financial support directly for the hospitality industry, which is shocking. I mean, they bailed out cruise ships, but they won't bail out restaurants. It's like amazing to me. But therein lies part of the influence of true lobby weight in government compared to what the lobbyists of the second largest employer in the nation can actually do when it represents small businesses. So here, our local economy is heavily rooted in agriculture. I mean, not only do we look to traditionally before cannabis and hemp ended up taking over, and that's a whole nother conversation for another time as far as the impact of land prices on the opportunities of people to get into farming. When Hunter said I spend a lot of time talking to old farmers, the first thought I had was they're all old, because the average age of a farmer these days is 59. I mean, you're looking at trying to get young people in is nearly impossible because the cost of land is so improbable for them to actually make a living. And so often when you look at to regenerative ag, as great as it is in so many practices, so often the people who are really significant and setting the examples are not making a lot of their money, or they haven't originally made their money in regenerative agriculture. So there's not many great examples of how people can enter regenerative agriculture and actually have a good life work balance that's there. I've spent a lot of time educating on incredible estate farms that sort of continue that idea of the bucolic American farm with great practices, and they're doing amazing things. The savory hubs, for example, are really great farms doing great work, but so many of them don't necessarily represent an inroad for young farmers, which is also a real challenge. So here, also, the rise of hemp and marijuana have created also an increase in land costs that makes it so incredibly difficult for anybody who has water rights. So it's even more important for us to keep the ongoing farms that are operational and not lose them, because nationwide there's an incredible risk of farmland loss. The American Farmland Trust is one of the ones doing that work as far as securing land in farm use and not losing it. But here locally, the wine and hemp, they're, as much as they're rooted in agriculture, they're not rooted in necessarily well-being for our area, other than sometimes through tourism. Many of them are monoculture still. Many of them still operate with high pesticide use and chemical use inputs. So really what we want to be focusing on too is how do you start supporting those same ones that are invested into soil well-being, soil growth, not monocultures, commingling of animals that are existing there and things like that. So, as we move away from the emergency state of providing hot food and supplemental sort of provision boxes, over the next couple of months, what our focus is to develop that farm program. And how do we work with the farms to create the support for everybody that needs it over that intermediate recovery phase in which people can still cook for themselves, but they can't necessarily still continue to afford the food that they need. And
so powerful.
And save the farms
Thank
at the
you.
same time.
Yeah, you reminded me that I learned a new word 2 years ago. There is a word in English for the community that surrounds a farm, and the word is grange. Well, with that as a summing up, I'd like to turn your tender attentions over to Hogan Sharrow, who's going to talk a little bit about what Emerging Futures has coming up in the next few months to support local businesses and particularly food businesses and people who want to be more efficient in their use of food. Hogan, are you still there?
I am here. Chris, do you want to put that slide up for me?
That's the new coordinator.
There we go. Okay, so I have to, sorry folks, you don't get to see my pretty face this evening because my internet is having issues. But it's really a human, not a robot. So first thing I wanted to point out, we've talked about it a couple of times, but I wanted to put it up on the screen for folks to see that spotlight on local food with our partners at SOCAN and their project, the Ashland Climate Action Project. It should be a really great conversation. I'm going to try and tune in there if I'm not working on some sort of freshman in high school homework, because I'm also getting to be a teacher for my daughter these days. What we have coming up is, first, we've got another professional food service workshop that should be coming up in February, and we'll have the details out on that very soon. We're just kind of finalizing them right now. We've got one-on-one business consulting that's coming online, and Paul is the person leading on that. And so that's a real great opportunity for folks. We're working with our partners at Recology to develop a zero waste certification for food service organizations. So much like their zero waste certification that they have now for businesses in general, this one's going to be specific for food service. Again, tackling that food waste issue. And you can always learn more about us at emergingfuturesnetwork.net. And you can email me directly. Sorry, I don't have it up on screen. I'll put it in the chat. Coordinator@emergingfuturesnetwork.net. It's a mouthful for an email, but it does get to me. So I would love to see if we have any more conversation, because I think we've got a great opportunity while we still have Hunter, Adam, and Gabriela online. So if there are any other questions, I just want to make sure you guys have time for that as well. And I really want to thank you all for attending. This is my first event with Emerging Futures. I just joined in December, and I'm really excited about the prospects we have here. And it's great to see this turnout of folks, especially the young folks like Paul showing up. I really, really appreciate that. All right. With that, I'll just see if we've got any more. We can stop the screen, Chris, and we'll see if we've got any more questions or any more comments that folks want to throw in.
I keep thinking about the statistic that Hunter put out. If only 2% of ag lands were farmed regeneratively, that we could neutralize our current carbon emissions. And I'm curious if those figures have been broken down to Oregon. Does anybody know what the local figures there are?
the
I speak
figures,
up? Can I speak to?
hang on one
And-
second. The
Katie,
figures
hold just a
are
minute, let her talk, and then we'll come back to you.
increase soil carbon 2%, and you offset all anthropogenic. Put 1% of ag land into agrovoltaics, and you supply all the electricity that we need globally. But yes, the staggeringly large numbers.
Yeah, and I know the Marine Carbon Project in California was calculating at one point that if California ag lands converted to perennial grasses, California alone would sequester more carbon than the world secretes.
We did a calculation that if you, let's see, implemented regenerative grazing on the world's grasslands over 30 years time, and assuming very conservative increases in carbon of 1% soil organic matter per acre per year, over 30 years time, we get back to 280 parts per million concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. So you roll climate change back to the pre-industrial level over 30 years time. Just
with regenerative
grazing.
Yeah.
Now that's
Katie,
a big if all the world's grasslands. On the other hand, doing this is profitable. And it's generally easier to swim with the current than against it.
Yeah. Katie Farrell, I didn't mean to take your thunder there.
I just, I'm typing something into the chat, but I'll just reiterate. If you go to cultivateoregon.org and look at the 11 expert speakers from around the world, including our own Dr. Ray Seidler, you will see tons of information on the statistics and the viability of carbon sequestration and regenerative ag. And I also wanted to just answer Angelina on the question of young farmers. You know, we've got several organizations, Rogue Farm Corps, Greenhorns, a few others that actually work on that. And the Oregon Extension just offered, I saw online today, a 4-part session on land. It's called Changing Hands, but on passing land to young farmers. So that's a huge part. But you can also check with Beyond Toxics, Pollinator Project. In fact, the Oregon State Grange has worked with all our granges. Paul mentioned Grange, but Grange is a trim tab for us because that was the middle ground for the reconstruction of the South. And we're really trying to take a position to arbitrate between these two disparate sides, in addition to passing legislation at the state and national level that support regenerative agriculture and other practical solutions to climate and social injustice and environmental inequities. So I'm just going to leave that in the chat, but I have tons of resources in the region for 30 years of kind of working with all these different, what I call the change agencies. And now it's really time for us to kind of move forward. So I'm so glad to meet Hunter and finally Paul and all of you. I see so many people who hung in there since a long, long time for our opportunity to do the right thing for the planet. So I'm going to put this in the chat, and if anybody wants to contact me, it's pretty easy to do.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks for all the work that you and Rihanna and Ray and the others did on that soil symposium in November. It really was a stellar event with people from all over the world.
It's all
so
there.
Cultivate Oregon has lots of resources.
Cultivateoregon.org. All 11 speakers, you know, Australia, 2 incredible speakers on their statewide carbon marketplace. They are on there. All 11 speakers are taped, and they did an excellent job of putting up a lot of the charts that not only show the impact of agricultural, actions, but also forestry. Also, one of my pet projects is the recycling and materials sector of drawdown and the solutions that are there that we really need to get on that. So that's one of my next big kind of revisiting that. So I hope you'll go to cultivateoregon.org and see Dr. Ray Seidler, who's really the leader in GMO free movement here. He was the retired EPA scientist who really has taken a huge leadership role. So, and he's always available too. So I encourage you to watch for our how to engage in the carbon marketplace. And we're raising funds now to actually pay our local farmers and landowners who are already involved in regenerative ag in their land, to give them some financial incentives to continue that.
Don't be shy, unmute yourself.
If you all want to see the extent to which investing locally matters, here are a couple of slides on it. How much of the money, when you spend it locally, the better part of half your money stays in the community. And this is called the economic multiplier, because every time a dollar is respent in the community, it generates that extra benefit for the community. So the benefit is more than the original dollar, whereas if you spend it on a chain, it all leaves. Then just doing this a little bit matters a lot. So if you all spend just a little bit more money locally, as opposed to taking the easy way out and ordering through Amazon, it makes a big difference in the strength of your local community economy.
Yeah, while we're sheltered in place, we're getting all our vegetables from Rogue Produce. It's wonderful.
I could say something real quick. I just want to thank everyone who organized this, everyone who's spoken. It's really been inspiring. I feel like one of the big takeaways for me right now is that, I mean, I'm just amazed at how hearing from each of you has really illustrated so much of how so many of the challenges that we're facing and the things that we want to do are interconnected, and there's actually like not any separation between these issues ultimately, like the environmental crisis, the issues, the social justice issues, all of it is connected. So I'm just appreciating the way that you all have illustrated that. I actually have a million questions. Part of why I've been quiet is because I don't really even know how to start, but I would say I do recognize that there are a relatively small number of young people, as far as I can tell, here present right now, and I'm just noticing that. I'm also noticing the majority of the folks here being white, and I'm also making assumptions based on whose videos I can see right now. But I just wanted to point that out and just ask the question of how, like, particularly as a young person, I'm interested in intergenerational conversations happening, because as someone who's been studying permaculture and interested in regenerative agriculture for a while, I'm pretty familiar with the issue of young farmers, the need for young farmers, and the barriers that have been spoken to. And I'm just, I'm curious about how we can, as a community, encourage more of that intergenerational connection, as well as that cross-cultural connection in these conversations, because otherwise I feel, I worry that there is a, I worry that there's not enough dialogue, and what ends up happening is that people get left behind, or things carry forward and decisions are made, and funding is allocated, and grants are rewarded, and things continue to happen, and people who aren't a part of these conversations get left behind. And my concern, like, I feel like I'm even noticing in the dynamic here as I hesitated to speak. The way that people were jumping in, and there's almost this feeling of like too much packed into one session, and I think that's an inevitable thing, but it's like I hesitate to speak because I want to learn, and I also feel like I've learned a lot about the need to step back and make space for people who don't speak. And I'm bringing all this to the table because I feel like one of the things that I've taken away from this time with you all is how much actually the things that I feel like I've reserved for conversations about equity or, you know, racial justice issues, I've put those things aside to be in that box and not brought them up in the conversations about things like regenerative agriculture. And I think one of the really, really powerful things that I've experienced over the years is like where those things can intersect, and the power of really integrating those issues. And I feel like so much of what you all have spoken to is doing that. Like, especially I'm looking at Rogue Food Unites, like this is a really incredible thing, like that is emerging. And I feel like there's so much potential. And I just really want to continue these conversations and try to invite more people into the conversation who might not be here currently. So I'll stop talking now, but I really appreciate you all and just look forward to, you know, if people are like interested in what I'm talking about and want to have more conversations about it, please, I'm super open to that. This like all of what I'm passionate about has been touched on pretty much in this conversation at some point. So I'm so here for it. And yeah, thanks everybody.
Danny, I just want to say there are many things behind the scenes are not necessarily represented now, but I could let you know about. For instance, Southern Oregon Pachamama Alliance just linked with another group called Long-Term Secure Short-Term Housing, which is really a grassroots effort to actually fund directly the people who are impacted by the fires. And that's a dynamic group. And, you know, there's lots of things that Cultivate Oregon is building into the carbon marketplace with special incentives to minorities, female landowners, all kinds of other things. So all these things do have their tendrils out into the justice community. So if you want to get in touch with me, please, I'd be glad to help you meet some of those people who are more specific in those areas, but are also linked with a lot of what's been talking about here.
Thanks, Katie. And Donnie, thank you so much for speaking up. Precious gems.
To add to that, I think that after working in sort of like the local food and regenerative movement for a while before this, I think largely so often the conversation around access and equity is just not present in understanding, especially around the meat, which is so often the center point of how you create regenerative ag is by livestock, and who's that livestock being sold to, and who actually has the opportunity to be able to have access to the products from regenerative ag farms. And so there's been a lot of tone deaf messaging in that industry, I think, for a long time. And I think part of the shift that needs to happen is that it needs to be front and center for our conversations around food, is that it's not something that's sort of like a conversation or that's like a small portion of it. It's central to how we are today and how we got here. And I think it's, you see the difference in people who are attacking it truthfully, accountably from like the onset as part of like what their core goal is. It's not just another sort of like, you know, HR mission for an organization. So
great parting thought. Thank you so much, Adam.
I think that's important. Danny,
Yeah.
if you want to be involved, you can also reach out to me and we can talk more about it.
Tremendous opportunities for involvement everywhere here. Such a wealth of people and resources and connections. Special thanks to Hunter Lovins and Gabriela Satay and Adam Danforth, as well as to Hogan Chero and Julie Caldwell and the folks at Emerging Futures, our other board member, Rod Newton. This has been a really fertile session, and we deeply appreciate all of you who were able to participate. We do want to honor the time here because many people are going to break for dinner and then come back at 7 o'clock for SOCAN's Spotlight. And this has been really a rare opportunity. So deep gratitude to all of you.
In?
Please.
I just want to say one thing.
This is Julie Caldwell, our founder at Emerging Futures, for those who aren't
so
tracking
anyone
gallery.
who's not on our newsletter, wants to hear about more programming, please go to our website, emergingfuturesnetwork.net, or go to the Facebook page, same. If you like tonight's program, please make a donation. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And a special thanks to Chris Byrne, who is in the background tonight making all the technology work. He really does a lot more than technology. Chris is a wonderful asset to the Dream Stream here at Emerging Futures. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll hope to see you at 7 o'clock for SOCAN.
Thanks for having me, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.